this particular domain, we'll be talking about like this. The name of this domain is Information Security Governance and Risk Management. Now, before I start this domain, let me just brief you on few important things on CISSP. So CISSP is a 6 hours exam. It's a paper written exam with 250 questions, and there is no negative marking. So all the questions are multiple choice questions. Over a period of time, this exam has become world recognized, and if you have this exam in your profile, you are treated as a person who can be nurtured for any profile in the industry in information security, be it cyber security, be it IT audit, be it information security consulting, be it your governance related profiles. So this is a very important certification which has become very popular in the recent years, and I'm sure this is the reason you all are here and attending this webinar. Now, in terms of number of domains, we have 10 domains, and this is potentially one of the easy domains, which is information security governance and risk management. Now, easy is a subjective word. It may be easy for you, may not be for me. It may be easy for me, and so I mean it may vary from person to person. So mainly what I have seen is people who are from an engineering background, people who are from a technical background, for them this domain is a tough domain, and people who have, let's say, some years of experience into management positions, or they have understood or they have gone through some other courses like COBIT, so for them this domain becomes a very easy domain. Now as I always say, the main book to follow for the CISSP exam is the Sean Harris 6th edition book, and parallelly as a guidebook, as a help book, as a consulting partner, you should keep you should keep the book called ISC Square 3rd edition book. So these are the two books which you should always have on your desktop saved as a soft copy. And Sean Harris 6th edition book, it is preferred if you have a hard copy of this book, because you may you may be required to read this book line by line. The whole book has to be read. Now, this particular domain is domain 2 of the Sean Harris book and domain 3 of the ISC Square 3rd edition book. Now moving on to the next slide. So this is the agenda of what we will be covering. Now this particular domain, information security governance and risk management, I will be teaching you in two parts. So part 1 we have scheduled today, and part 2 we will be scheduling the next coming Saturday, which will be again 10 to 11:30. So in these two classes we will be completing this domain, and I can assure you, if you are with me, if you ensure that all the concepts are learned by you, solving questions will be a cakewalk, because everything in the exam or the questions, we will be doing some questions also on the calls, so all the questions will be easy for you to solve. So let's move on to the first topic, which is information security management. Now this is just a definition of information security management. All points which are given in red are important keywords. So information security management is all about a manager who is into information security position, right? So I'm sure this is a very simple topic. We all understand the basic responsibilities are risk management, information security policies, procedures, standards, guidelines, baselines. Now what are these? What is the difference between policies, procedures, standards, guidelines? This all we will be learning in this domain. Then information classification, security organization, security education. So I'm sure, we all understand that these are some of the key responsibilities what an information security manager has to deal with. But again, drafting of information security policies may not be may not be the responsibility of an information security manager. So this concept is more from a generalized concept, which is information security management. Now this management may talk about the information security manager, the CISO of the company, chief information security officer, or let's say your other security positions, some quality positions. So this is in a general sense, this concept has been given. What do we understand as a holistic picture of information security management? That's where all these things come in. Before I move ahead, if anybody of you has any doubts, okay, or questions, please post them on the chat window. I'll be happy to answer them. Now the next is information security governance. Would anybody of you like to take an initiative and say and define what is governance in your terms? Anybody, you can type it on the chat window. What do you understand by governance? So if somebody asks me what is governance, for me governance is accountability. For me governance is alignment. What do I mean by accountability? Everybody knows what he's doing and everybody takes the ownership of his job areas. Similarly, when I say alignment, everybody knows whom he is reporting to and there is a complete management oversight of each and every action what is happening in the company. So these are the two perspectives which I normally deal with governance. But how CISSP explains governance is, security governance is the set of responsibilities and practices exercised by the board and executive management with the goal of providing strategic direction. This is what I said, alignment, ensuring that objectives are achieved, ascertaining that risks are managed appropriately, and verifying that the enterprise's resources are used responsibly. So this resources are used responsibly. This means nothing but everybody takes ownership of their actions. So that's where your concept of governance comes in. If a question comes which talks about the alignment and accountability, the question is on governance. There is no doubt in that. Moving on to the next concept. Now we have three types of goals. One is called as strategic goal, other is called as tactical goal, and the next one is called as operational goals. So please remember as a thumb rule, anything greater than 1 year is called as a strategic goal. So you may have a, so what's your long-term strategy? And that's where your, so so strategy is all about greater than 1 year, what you have in the time horizon. Tactical is mid-term, which is 6 months to 1 year. Operational is short-term, day-to-day months. Now you may have a strategic goal in terms of implementing ISO 22301 as part of your business continuity requirements. That may be your strategy goal and you may like to implement it, let's say after 2 years. Tactical goal is some 6 months to 1 year. Like, so one of the examples would be, let's say, implementing bring your own device policy. Yeah, so that's where your tactical, because that's in huge demand now and everybody wants to check office emails on their phones and all. So that would be a tactical goal. Operational goal would be something like day-to-day months. So it is more like, let's say you want to implement, you want to monitor your network logs and all those things, some sort of operational stuff. So that's where your operational goals come into picture. If you have any questions, please post on the chat window, else we'll move ahead. Now there are two concepts. One is called as due care and other is called as due diligence. But before I explain you these concepts, let me take a pen. So let's say you have two companies. One company is, let's say, a car manufacturing company and the other company is, let's say, some spare parts manufacturing company, right? Now this car manufacturing company has its own IT infrastructure and similarly this spare parts manufacturing company has its own IT infrastructure and they have a very old partnership, and spare part company, let's say, provides them tires and this car company has a very long lasting relationship with this spare parts company. But over a period of time what happens is the car company experiences some virus on their network. Now they think that this virus, I mean there was some electronic what we call as the EDI. This is nothing but your electronic data interchange, through which all the purchase orders and the goods receipt notes are exchanged between both the companies. Now let's say the car company experiences virus on their network and they think that the virus came from the spare parts company, whereas the spare part company says that no, it is not possible because we have a very robust IT infrastructure in place and this is not possible. The virus cannot flow from our network to the car company's network. Now their long lasting relationship has come to a full stop and they both are fighting and now they go to court and let's say here's the judge. So anybody of you can, so whom should the judge favor now? They both are fighting. Car company says that the virus came from the spare, and the spare part company says that the virus did not go from our side. We have a very sound, robust IT infrastructure security policies implemented. Anybody uh, wants to define this scenario as what should the judge, or let's say whom should the judge favor? Anybody? Anybody wants to define this? Whom should the judge favor? Okay. So the judge will favor the company who can prove that they have a better security posture. See, at the end of the day, the virus is already in the car company's network, and forensics and all. Let's assume it's not possible. Now the judge has to give a favor, right? So judge will ask both the companies to prove as how much they invest on their IT security postures, and what kind of audit reports they have, and how sound is their, or how mature is their information security, um, let's say, all initiatives they have on their premises. So on the basis of that, judge, let's say the spare part companies proves that they get audited by Deloitte 2 times a year, and let's say they have very sound information security policies which are reviewed every year, and they have positions on chief privacy officer, on chief information security officer, and then they have very well documented roles and responsibility metrics. They are ISO 27135, and then they are so they have done all the good things, whereas the car company is not able to achieve that particular level of information security maturity levels. So in that case, the judge will favor this spare parts company, and this is because of two concepts which are important from a CISSP parlance. The concepts are due care and due diligence. So all the initiatives what you take as part of your security posture, like let's say I want to get ISO 27001 certified, I want to start a project on single sign-on, or let's say identity and access management, or let's say I want to push all my IT infrastructure to cloud. Yeah, so, or let's say I want to have outsourcing partners like Infosys, Wipro, HCL, IBM. I mean, all these big decisions what you make, and how you will manage the risk is part of your due care. Whereas due diligence, so let me put it in a different way. Due care is a high level concept. Okay, so it is like 1,000 feet high level to ground. And when I say due care is an initiative level concept, whereas due diligence, so let's say you have taken an initiative. The initiative is more about, let's say I want to implement an identity and access management system in my company. Due diligence is all about, okay, once this system is implemented, am I maintaining it? Am I ensuring that all patches are updated? Am I ensuring that the vendor support is available with me throughout the journey? Am I ensuring that all the job roles are clearly defined in the identity and access management? The interface between various applications is clearly set. The profile information that flows from one application to the other application is limited only to the extent it is required. All those nitty-gritties in relation to the identity and access management will be monitored and managed as part of the due diligence concept. Now, this is an area which I used to confuse a lot when I was preparing for CISSP. A good way to remember these concepts is due diligence is all about to detect. So let's say this is due care is nothing but DC, the first alphabet of each word, and due diligence is nothing but DD. So the other way to remember this is do control, that is due care, and do detect, that is due diligence. So why I am saying do control? Because you are trying to take an initiative to do something, to control something. So if I am trying to implement an identity and access management, I want to control the whole confusion of access management that is there on my in my company currently. And do detect means once I have taken an initiative to control, then how I am going to detect, how I am going to monitor the logs, how I am going to ensure that everything is managed. I am going to detect the operational level stuff, and that's where your due diligence comes into picture. So these are the two concepts. I'm sure with this explanation, this must be clear to you. Due care is a high level concept, whereas due diligence is a very close to ground operations level concept. If you have any questions further, please post it on the chat window. I'll be happy to answer them. Moving on to the next slide. Now, can we have a question in exam? What is ongoing risk assessment? Is it a due care or due diligence? Taking responsibility for security, is it a due care or due diligence? Reviewing adequacy of threat analysis, is it a due care or due diligence? Firstly, in the exam, you will not get such kind of questions. And due care and due diligence, they are subjective concepts. Okay, I mean, it depends upon the magnitude or the size of the company. So what may be due diligence for a big company may be due care for a small company. So let's not get into these mind teasers and all, but as a concept you should understand whatever is at a high level is called as a due care, and whatever is at a low level or due detect is a due diligence concept. Moving on to the next concept, which is my security policy. Now we all are working in corporates, we all have our policies defined in the company. So what's the security policy? And let me just focus on policy first of all. So what is a policy? Does anybody wants to say on the chat window what is their understanding of a policy? You can just quickly type on the chat window. What comes first to your mind when you hear the word policy? Okay, it's a set of rules. Anybody else? Okay, so policy is at a very high level. Yeah, so what's a security policy? Okay, if anybody asks me, is policy a due care or a due diligence? What's your answers? Anybody? Is policy a due care or a due diligence? As per the concept we have learned, policy is a due care concept, because policy is an initiative which will tell you that I'll be doing these all things, or let's say as a company I expect all these things to be done. A policy does not guarantee that this will be done. A policy is a written administrative kind of a control which is at a very high level, and it says that we are into this industry and this is what we expect as part of our initiative. So it's a due care kind of let me say item. It's a due care item. It's not a due diligence item. Now, what should be an ideal length of a policy? As per my understanding and policy, and what CISSP says is a policy document should not be very long in length, right? So it depends upon the magnitude, the scalability of the company. So companies like, let's say, very big companies like Hindustan Unilever Limited, or let's say you talk about your Walmart and all, they may have a policy which may be, let's say, 10 to 12 pages, but you may have other companies which may have policies like just hardly 4 or 5 pages. But if a company provides me a policy which is like 80-90 pages, that's not a policy. That is something you have written and you really don't know what, as a concept, what policy means. See, policy is all about general goals, abstract goals. So let's say tomorrow I open a company which is, let's say, some IT services, let's say some consulting organization, and then I want to draft an information security policy for my organization. If I am into consulting business, client data is very critical for me. My own IT assets are very critical for me. So my information security policy will talk upon things like this. I will ensure that the client data is captured in a minimal manner to the extent it is required. Then I have proper retention, I have proper archival, and then I save them in an encrypted format. I provide access to on a need basis. I will ensure that all my IT assets are secured to the extent relevant to information security management system in reference to ISO 27001. I'll ensure that proper information classification is followed. We will have the policy of no client data taken outside the company, and so on. I will write some abstract goals which as a company, as part of that industry, I want to achieve. That's it. Do you think this will go till 40-45 pages? No, not at all. I don't think so. This will hardly be maximum 3 to 4 pages. This is a very high level document. Please remember, this is a due care initiative. This is not due diligence initiative. So in within the policy, I will also define what's the purpose of this. Let's say I'm talking about now information security policy. So I'll say, why do I need information security as part of my company? What is the scope within scope of information security? Now, am I covering marketing department also? Am I covering legal department also? Am I covering only IT department? So this will all be the scope within the organization. And then it is also important to define the roles and responsibilities of critical positions, like let's say chief information officer, or let's say chief information security officer, or let's say your let's say like your information security officers. So all these people, the responsibilities should be defined in the policy. Then next is compliance. This is where you talk about all these key initiatives and what you. So let's say the policy will also say that we will be taking periodic backups on a continual basis. Now, how the backup is taken, that will go as part of the backup procedure, but the policy will just give an abstract goal that we will be taking an initiative to take backups on a regular basis. So that's where my policy comes in. I hope the message was clear. If anybody of you has any questions further on policy, please post on the chat window. I'll be happy to answer. From an exam perspective, you may not get any direct question on policy, but just remember, policy is a high level document. It has abstract goals. The length should not be very large, and it just gives you the due care responsibilities of an organization. If you can remember these 4 points, you will not have any problems in the whole career journey of your information security. Moving on to the next one. So these are some of the characteristics of the policy. Like this is what I just explained to you. Should be strategic in nature. When I say strategic, all about due care. Must be supported by management, aligned to business objectives. Very generic, non-technical. Very important. You know, some people start talking about patches in the policy. Come on, patches. If you want to talk about patches, you talk about in your baseline hardening policy. Either baseline hardening policy, or let's say your hardening documents. Information security policy is at a much high level. Use forceful and directive wording. What do I mean by this is, we will ensure that we are ISO 27001. That should be the wording of a policy. The policy wording should not be like this. We may ensure that going forward, after 2 years, we will take a collaborative call whether we need ISO 27001 or not. No, that's the wrong language. It should be forceful and directive wording. Should be communicated properly, reviewed at least once in a year, or any change to the organization should be updated at least once in 3 years. Once in 3 years? Really? Why not every year? Why not every 2 years? See, here again a very important concept is there. As I said, policy is a high level document. If it's a high level document, if it is strategic in nature, do you think your strategy will change every year? No, right? So the frequency in which the policy is reviewed cannot be 1 year, or it can be 2 years. There is no like hard rule. It has to be 3 years only. This is what CISSP says, but I have seen in my experience that policies are reviewed. In fact, every year also in banking, the policies are reviewed every year as part of the Basel II committee requirements. Whereas in IT companies and all, policies may be reviewed every 2 years. In government organizations, policies may be reviewed every 2 years. So it all depends as how dynamic your environment is, how many initiatives, how many mergers, how many new initiatives you have taken over a period of time. So this call, who is the right person to take this call as when should a policy be reviewed? This rests with the head of information security, or the person who takes the ownership of risk management in an organization. He is the person who is in the best capacity to take this call as what should be the review frequency for a policy. Now moving on to the next concept. If you have any questions, please post on the chat window. I'll be happy to take them up. Moving on to the next concept, which is like types of policies. Now, as I said, this domain is not very tough. This is more about plain English, and I'm sure we all have infosec background will be able to understand this. So policy can be of three types. I'll just keep it at a high level. First is called as the organizational policy. The second is called as the issue specific policy, and the third is system specific policy. So organization policy example is corporate governance policy. Yeah, that's relates to the organization as a whole. Any other example of an organizational policy? Anybody can post on the chat window. What's the other example of organizational policy? Let's say your employee policy, right? So employee policy, or in fact that will again be an HR related policy. Organization policy can be, let's say, your your in fact corporate governance policy will talk about your board of directors, will talk about your independent directors, will talk about your whistleblower policy, will talk about your internal audit charters. So corporate governance policy is one of the very good examples because it covers the whole enterprise wide risk management, right? Then other examples can also be there. I mean, nothing comes to my mind as such right now, but there can be some other examples of policies also which can be which will span throughout the organizations. Yeah, some of the examples can be, let's say, risk aggregation policy. Now you may have risk in India, you may have risk in Russia, you may have risk in Australia as part of your various business units, and risk aggregation. Yeah, I hope you are able to hear me now. Yeah, so let me know if you are still not able to hear me.
The audio seems okay on this end, so Tosin, maybe just check.
Yeah, so organization policy is something which spans throughout the organization, and then you have the issue specific policy. Issue specific, as the name suggests, specific to a particular issue. Let's say employee hiring, termination policy, background check policy, right? Or let's say all these kind of things. Just give me 1 minute, please. Yeah, so the last is called as a system specific policy. So when I say the system specific policy, this is related to your IT infrastructure. One of the good examples can be operating system hardening policy. For people who are new to the word hardening, this is nothing but how do you secure your operating system. So let's say this hardening policy will talk all about which all ports are open, which all services are running, which all patches needs to be updated, which is the minimum set of software applications that should be installed on the operating system, and so on. So this is all about your system specific policy. Can there be any questions in the exam? Exam may not test you on each and every slide. Exam will test you on your maturity levels to information security as a whole. But as a consulting professional, as a professional working in InfoSec, you should be aware as what kind of policies can be there in various scenarios. Now moving on to the next concept, which is called as standards. This is very easy. We all know ISO 27001 is a standard, and your activities towards compliance to ISO 27001 can be audited, and then you may be certified. I'll repeat this sentence. Your activities towards compliance to ISO 27001 requirements can be audited, and then you get certified to a standard. I hope that makes sense. I'll just repeat this sentence again because for many of you, okay, so great. So okay, I'll just repeat this. Your activities compliance to the requirements of ISO 27001 get audited, and then you get certified to a standard. So standard is nothing but it is one of the good practices, right? So standard is something which is world recognized, and then you can adopt a standard to come up to a maturity level which is well recognized throughout the world. So if you see mandatory activities, actions, rules or regulations. So if let's say you want to get ISO 27001, you need to comply to all those mandatory requirements which are mentioned there. It provides a means to ensure that specific technologies, applications, parameters, and procedures are implemented in a uniform manner across the organization. This is nothing but the meaning of this ISO 27001. So what we should remember is a standard is something which will help you to 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 brush up your maturity levels, and if you comply to the standard requirements, you are confident that you are in a good state. That's where the standards comes into picture. So I hope the difference between policy and standard is clear now. Next is guidelines. As the name suggests, this is not something which you should definitely do. It is just a guideline, right? So a guideline can be, let's say if I have to like right now I am in London, if I have to go to Waterloo, I can go through a particular route, I can go through other route, I can go through other route. So these are all guidelines. Now depending upon my requirement, the amount of fare I can afford, the amount of time I have, the natural view I want to see, I'll take a particular route. So guidelines are nothing but just prescriptive documents which you can take and adapt to your scenario. So in information security parlance, guidelines can be the way you do encryption in your organization. Or let's say you want to set up your internal audit departments, you will have various guidelines on each and everything. So like one of the examples is password guidelines. So password good practices, nothing. Guidelines are nothing but your good practices. Are standards also good practices? Because I just said standards are also good practices. Yes, standards are also good practices, but if you comply to a standard, then all the requirements in the standard become mandatory requirements for you. But guidelines, guidelines, you don't need to comply let's say you select a particular guideline. In that guideline also there is no requirement that you need to comply 100% to all the requirements in that guidelines. So this is just, I'll say, recommendation documents, recommended documents, recommendations, nothing more than that. So if you want to read the slide, guidelines are recommended actions and operational guides to users, IT staff, operations, and others when a specific standard does not apply. They help to ensure that security measures are observed. Just a simple concept, nothing important here. Now we move on to the next one, which is called as procedures. So what's the main difference between a policy and a procedure? A policy is a due care concept, which is a very high level abstract goal concept. A procedure is a due diligence concept. Yeah, please remember these terms. So when I say due diligence, this means that procedures are very close to ground. They are step-by-step actions. So let's say we will take regular backups. This is an abstract, a generic goal which will be mentioned in the information security policy. Now how you will be taking the backup? Who will be the backup administrator? Who will monitor the backup logs? Where will the tapes be stored? Will we have any backup restoration procedures? Or let's say what will happen if a backup fails? So all these kind of scenarios will get into the backup procedure document, because these are nothing but the step-by-step actions, and this is where your due diligence concept comes into picture, because you are managing and detecting everything as part of this step-by-step action. So that's where your concept of procedures come into picture. One of the examples can be incident response procedures. So incident policy will say we will have proper problem and incident management processes established as part of our organization. The procedure will say what is the step-by-step action to do an incident response. So that's where your concept of procedures come into picture. Any questions, please post on the chat window, else we'll move on to the next concept. Now we have the concept of baselines. So we have learned the concept of policy, we have learned the concept of standards, we have learned the concept of guidelines, we learned the concept of procedures. Then the next is baselines. So anybody, what's the meaning of the term baselines? Can you post on the chat window? Anybody? Or let me unmute everybody. Anybody wants to explain what is the meaning of the word baseline? Okay, so a baseline is nothing but the minimum set of requirements, right? So like I just gave you an example of OS, operating system hardening document. So hardening, baseline, they are all synonyms used in the information security world. So when you say hardening of an operating system, this means which all ports are open, which all services are running, which all minimum set of applications that will be installed on the operating system. So this is all nothing but your minimal set of requirements to secure that operating system. So in other words, these are nothing but your minimum set of baseline requirements to secure our operating system. So if you see the example here, the last bullet, a baseline may specify that all systems must have specific service pack installed for operating system. So nothing but baseline is a minimum set of requirements which should definitely be there. Now let me give you an example in layman terms. We all carry smartphones, right? But do we can we confidently say that our smartphones are secure? Maybe not, right? Because we really every day we go to Play Store and we download a new application, and we are, I mean, I don't know how much we are really bothered about protecting our smartphones. But if you go to an organization and you are using their PC, their laptop or their desktop, I'm sure you are confident in saying that these laptops are secure because you know that this is a world-class organization and the password policy, the patches are updated, it has encryption, and then you can't install a software. This is all because that laptop is constrained, is restricted, is binded by a laptop baseline policy or a laptop security hardening policy. And that's where, as part of your IT audits, the auditors are interested in knowing how do you secure your laptops. Do you have a baselining or hardening policies documented? And that's where these concepts comes into picture. I hope the message was very clear now. If you have any questions, please post on the chat window. Else we'll move on to the next slide. Now this is nothing but just a relation between. See, at the end of the day, whatever you do, okay, don't read the slide, just hear me out. At the end of the day, whatever you do should be triggered by your organizational requirements, right? If you are in a banking sector, please don't read the slide, okay, just hear me out. If you are in a banking sector, you are regulated by Financial Conduct Authority, Prudential Conduct Authority, uh, you are regulated by Basel II requirements, Basel III requirements. Every country has their own regulator, right? So your organizational requirement may change from country to country. Your organizational requirements may change from regulator to regulator, and your information security policy should be triggered by all these requirements. Then your procedures should be triggered by all the abstract goals which are mentioned in the policy. Standards should be triggered by, do you really need them? Is that part of our strategic goal? Is that part of our tactical goal? Is that part of our operational goal? And guidelines are nothing but just parallel documents. You may take a guideline, adopt to it, adapt to it, and you may leave it anytime. So that's where the main message from this slide was. Though this slide is not something which you should really memorize, but yes, if this message is clear, you are done with this slide. Moving on to the next one. Now here we'll be talking about some of the security controls. Now you may have various types of security controls. The first one is called as administrative controls. As the name suggests, it is all administrative nature control. You may talk about your policies, procedures, all documents that exist in the company. They are called as administrative controls because they are not IT controls. They are not human controls. Documentation is a kind of an administrative controls. The trainings, right? The periodic trainings you have, they are all administrative controls. Next is technical controls. Technical controls, the other name for technical controls is logical controls. So what can be a technical control? Anything that has to do with computer, which has to do with system, which has to do with information technology is called as a technical control. Your password controls, your patch controls, your providing need basis access to employees controls, your antivirus controls, your IDS, IPS firewall controls, your switches, routers controls. All these are technical controls. But you know what? There can be a technical control in physical security also. And I really struggled to understand this when I was preparing for the exam, because I got a question in the exam which was on physical security and it was talking about technical controls. I was not able to connect both these concepts. But you should always remember, as part of physical security also, you may have technical controls like CCTV cameras. Now CCTV camera is again your information technology, but it is part of the physical security. So technical controls can be from physical security also. Technical controls can be throughout the organization as part of the information technology also. So that's where your technical controls come into picture. I can share these slides with all of you. So please be with me. Just be with the flow of this session. I hope you all are benefiting from this session. These slides I can share with you for your reference, and just be with the flow. We are all gearing up. We are all moving ahead towards achieving our certification, which is called CISSP. So the next slide is on physical controls. This is like a very simple slide. I don't think I should explain anything here. We are all geared up to understand this. We have maturity levels. Now, controls can be of various types. There can be a deterrent control. There can be preventive, corrective, recovery, detective, compensating. I will just explain 2-3 here because rest are self-explanatory. There is a control called deterrent. In many places it will be written no smoking here. Definitely nobody will smoke there. So this is a kind of a deterrent control. A deterrent control is nothing but which demotivates a user to perform a specific action. Now let's say you are traveling in London in a bus and the bus has 4 CCTV cameras. Definitely the crime rate will be very low, because everybody knows he is monitored throughout. In the bus with the help of those CCTV cameras are working or not, that's a different story. But those CCTV cameras will definitely act as a deterrent control to demotivate the user to perform his, let's say, illegal actions or something. Then the last is called as compensating control. What is compensating? You compensate for something, as the name suggests, right? So let's say it's a small organization and very few people are there, and it is not possible to establish segregation of duties. So let's say somebody creates a purchase order and he only approves it. Now this is a risk, right? From an information security parlance, he can create a fuzzy purchase order and approve it. So there can be a fraud that can happen in the purchase cycle. So what can be a compensating control is every day whatever purchase orders he has raised and approved, right? A report of all the purchase orders daily goes to his managers. Now his manager looks at it or not, that's a different story. But this is a kind of a compensating control where he will definitely be worried that my actions may get noted and let me do my job correctly. So this is just a very small example of compensating control. And then you have preventive control is something which so let's say you go to your Gmail account, it asks you for username and password. So definitely that's an example of a preventive control. So it prevents you to access your email till the time you enter your username and password. Yeah. Then next is corrective control. So corrective control is more about after the action. So let's say a very good example of corrective control is the undo, UNDO feature of what we have in MS Word. what we have in Gmail. So whatever you have deleted or whatever changes you made, you can correct them with the help of that undo function. So that's kind of a corrective control. Recovery controls are nothing but your backups. Example, very good example is backups. And then detective control is nothing but you detect something. So after the action, this also. So detective control, one of the good examples can be your antivirus logs, or let's say your backup logs and all these things. So they act as detective controls. Can we get a question in exam? Is this detective? Is this corrective? Is this recovery? No. CISSP is, guys, let me give you a very interesting thought here. CISSP is a due care exam. It is not a due diligence exam. CISSP will test your maturity levels towards your thought processes, towards what initiatives you can take, towards what you think is correct, right? I mean, okay, mm, mm, let me not draw a boundary. I'll say CISSP is 70 to 80% due care, and just 20% to 30% it is your due diligence exam. So don't get into. I mean, CISSP will never ask you a question which is at a very low level. It will always ask you a question which is at a management angle, or which is at a management level, which is more to as what you would have done in this scenario. Yeah. So let us do a question here to understand this better. So can you all read the question number 1 and please post on the chat window as what would be your answer to this? You have just won a contract for a small software development firm which has asked you to perform a risk analysis. Very nice. The firm's president believes that risk is something that can be eliminated. As a CISSP, how should you respond to this statement? What should be your answers on the chat window quickly? Anybody? Yes, the answer will be B, as risk can be reduced, but it can never be eliminated. See, this is a sample question. This may not be an exam question. This is normally from a post-class quiz. Like once we are done with this particular session, I'll be circulating this post-class quiz with you. This is nothing but it helps you to develop your concept. Your exam question will be slightly more difficult than this. This is a very easy question just to help you to develop your concept. Let's do another question. So let's do this question. Which term describes the method of identifying vulnerabilities and threats and assessing the possible damage to determine where to implement security safeguards? Anybody? The answer to this question is again B, because risk analysis is all about identifying the vulnerabilities and threats. We'll be covering all this in the second class, which is on next Saturday. So there's nothing to worry here, but I'm just giving you an example as such. Let me take a question which we have already studied. Okay, let's do this question number 6, because it is something related to policies and procedures which we have already studied. So anybody wants to answer this question? What document gives detailed instructions on how to perform specific operations, providing a step-by-step guide? Quickly, friends, this is what we discussed. So the answer definitely has to be C, which is procedures, right? Now, let's do question number 8, which is all about which of the following is a document that is considered high level In that it defines formal rules by which employees of the organization must abide. Anybody? What should be the answer to question number 8? Yes. So the answer has to be policies. There is no doubt. Policy is a due care concept, a very high level document, and that's where the concept of policies come into picture. Excellent. So let's move back to our theory class. So these are the various types of controls, right? Now let's move on to the next concept, which is called as separation of duties. Separation of duties, segregation of duties, ensuring that one person is not able to do a maker checker concept is called as separation of duties. So let's say somebody is creating a purchase order, only the other person should approve it, and that's where your segregation of duties or separation of duties come into picture. One important point I would like to mention here: when I'm talking, just focus on what I'm trying to provide you the message. If it is getting difficult for you to read the slide and to hear me out also, please postpone your reading of the slide when I will share with you these slides. Just focus on what I'm talking and try to make a scenario out of it, try to make a story out of it, and just try to hear me out 100%. So segregation of duties, separation of duties is nothing but ensuring that one person cannot commit a fraud, right? He is not the person who can create a PO also and approve it also. Job rotation. This is a very interesting concept. Mainly this is followed in banking. I'll tell you why. So let's say you are a cashier at a particular branch of a bank. So you will be there for 2 years or 3 years, and then you are postponed to, let's say, in fact, job rotation. Let me start again. Job rotation. So job rotation is all about, let's say you do a particular task and then you are made to do some other task. So let me give you an example of my experience, or let's say my current profile in which I work for. So I work as an IT auditor also. I work as an information consulting, information governance specialist also. I work as an SAP auditor also, right? Then I also work as a GRC specialist. So in a nutshell, my company provides me engagements or client service delivery jobs across the plethora of responsibilities. In this manner, they are preparing me for they are making me as a cross functional professional, and that's where job rotation minimizes the risk. If let's say tomorrow, let's say the person who is only into SAP auditing, he leaves the company will lose out resource, right? Whereas if let's say somebody else is also there who can take up that particular job, who has cross training towards various aspects, so he will be company will not be losing out as a short term goal, as an operational goal. Strategically they will be losing out a resource, but in a short term it will not affect the company very much. That's where the concept of job rotation comes into picture. The next concept is mandatory vacations. Now, this is again a concept which is very much important in banking sector, because in fact in private sector also, like I used to work for one of the big four firms, and in that firm I used to get uh, 20 holidays in a year, and they were all paid holidays. But to be eligible for those paid holidays, I had to take mandatory 5 days of continuous holidays, right? This was a very crazy kind of a policy. I mean, firstly, I didn't understand, like, why do you want me to take 5 days of consecutive leaves to be eligible for uh, encashing my leaves? And when I read CISSP, I actually understood the meaning of this policy. This is because if you go on a 5 day continuous leave, some other person will come in your position and he will do your job, and he will be able to find out if you are making some fraud as part of your daily responsibilities or not. And that's where the concept of mandatory vacations comes into picture. In fact, for the bank, cashier and all, the people who release money, the hard cash, they definitely have to go on leave. I mean, they cannot be on the same seat 365 days a year. They will definitely go on leave, mandatory leave, for which they will be paid. That's a different thought process. But somebody else will sit in their position and will do the same task. So that's where the concept of mandatory vacations come into picture. Now you will get a question as out of job rotation and mandatory vacations, which one helps you to prevent collusion? What do I mean by collusion is, let's say two people join, I mean they get together, I mean they have their own chemistry, and they start making frauds. So separation of duties is something which can be diluted in that scenario. So let's say if I create a purchase order and then I convince my boss to approve the purchase order, a wrong purchase order, we both commit a fraud. So separation of duties can definitely not help in the scenario when it's a collision. Can job rotation help? Yes, job rotation can help, because in job rotation somebody else will come and do your job, and majority of the time the person is not made aware as who will be coming. In fact, job rotation is more about, so you know that how to approve a purchase order, right? So it is good for cross training and also reduces the likelihood that employees will collude for personal gain. Because see, at the end of the day, in fact, in the purchase order example, this collusion is not going very better with job rotation. So let me come up with some other example. This is like, let's say, yeah. So let's say you are doing some client service, yeah, and in fact, let me park here. I'll come back to you on this collusion example for job rotation. I'll make a note here, and this maybe we'll share on email. Nothing comes to my mind as such right now. So I'll come back to you on this. But please remember, from an exam point of view, collusion is an aspect which is controlled by job rotation. Then the next is mandatory vacations. This is again we have studied. Split knowledge. Split knowledge is again a very important concept. So let's say we have to launch a missile, right? So launching a missile is a very critical activity, right? So in that case, let's say there is one big password, and half password is known by person A and the other half is known by person B. So when both the passwords will be simultaneously entered in the login screen, only then the system will be validated and the missile will be launched. Other example is, let's say you go and operate your bank lockers. So one key is with you and the other key is with your branch manager. When both the keys will get into the locker and they will be rotated simultaneously, clockwise or anti-clockwise, the locker will open. So this is one of the examples of split knowledge. Dual control and split knowledge, they are very close concepts. Dual controls is also like the bank locker example goes with the dual control, and the missile password example goes with the split knowledge concept. So please remember this and have some thought after this class, as really the locker example goes with dual control. Yeah, so both have to be there. Split knowledge, can one person enter half the password and go for lunch, and then the other person comes in, enters the remaining password? Yeah, so both people is not required to be at the same time at the same place. Whereas in dual control, both the people are required to be in the same place. So that's where the thin line of difference comes between split knowledge and dual control. If you have any questions, please post on the chat window, else we'll move ahead. Now below are what kind of controls: CCTV, job rotation, firewall, termination policies. Don't worry, CISSP is not going to test you on all these things. Yeah, but we all know CCTV is kind of a technical logical control, and CCTV is a kind of a detective control. Job rotation, right? This is again kind of a administrative control, and job rotation will help you to prevent collusion. Firewall is a technical control, It is again a preventive control, as it will not allow unauthorized traffic to come into the organization. It will also act as a detective control because you will be able to monitor the logs. And then termination policy, again an administrative control. See the way I am talking, once you read this domain end to end, you will be able to connect all the dots, and you will be able to talk maturely as what kind of control, what category it falls, what is it, an administrative, technical, or is it yeah. So we'll be able to connect all the dots, and that's where the CISSP as an exam, it nurtures you to develop a maturity level to talk to anybody in this infosec arena, be it your CXOs or be it your operational managers, tactical managers, and so on. Now we move on to the information classification schemes. But before we move on to this, we start this topic. Anybody has any questions? Please post on the chat window. How is the class going? Anybody wants to share any feedback till now? Are you comfortable? Does it make sense to you? Anybody has any comments can post on the chat window. Okay. So let us start with the next concept, which is called as information classification and criteria. Now, as per CISSP, CISSP is like ISC Square organization, which is a US based organization. So you have classification criteria as per, I mean, CISSP gives you classification criteria as per the US Department of Defense, the military side and the government side. So mainly there are 4 classification. One is called as top secret, secret, and then you have sensitive but unclassified, and then you have unclassified. Now can we also adopt this as part of our organization? Yes, we can adopt this, but you know, I had an engagement where I tried to map this particular thing to the, there is a very thin line between secret and sensitive but unclassified. There is a very thin line between top secret and secret. It is very difficult to quantify these things, right? So in fact, if you go to Google and you write UK government information classification schemes, the government of UK has come up with a very good classification scheme. I'll show you. This is like from the government of UK, and what government of UK says is anybody who is a government organization in UK can adopt the classification schemes as official, secret, and top secret. I like this because anything which is very critical to you is a top secret. Anything you don't want to be shared within your employees publicly also. So if you see, all these 3 are internal. So they have not classified anything called as public, anything called as free to share. So all those pieces of information is unclassified. You know, the good control here is if you forget something to classify, automatically it becomes unclassified or public news. So that's where and this is very easy to implement because anything like insider information is a top secret, right? So your prospective client information is top secret, or it may be a secret within those managers. And then official can be purchase orders, goods received, your CRM information, your customer information, your sales information, anything, right? All those things will come as official. I mean, it all depends. Now the good part is UK government has also given you some understanding, or let's say what makes you classify something as official, what makes you classify something as secret. So just wanted to share with you that from UK government also you have classification schemes, and then CISSP mainly talks about the US Department of Defense classifications like top secret, secret, sensitive but unclassified. This is a term which really used to confuse me, but this is nothing but it is not unclassified, but it is sensitive also. So in fact, to be honest, you can consider this as confidential. So you have unclassified, then you have confidential, then you have secret, and then you have top secret. So that's where these classification schemes are. CISSP also gives you commercial data classification, which is like for let's say companies like Amazon, Microsoft, commercial companies. So there you may have public, sensitive, private, confidential. So can we have any question in exam? No. Then why are we studying this? Because we want you to develop maturity levels towards information classification schemes. Classifications which may be for a government, which may be for a military, which may be for a commercial, which may be for government organizations. They all may different because they all may be different in their perspectives, because the kind of information you have can vary very much. Yeah, so that's where this classification schemes comes into picture. Okay, so let's see who answers this question. You can say A, B, C, D. Yeah, so first question, who wants to answer? Which data classification should apply to commercial trade secrets? Anybody? And the second question is, which of the following is best practice to employ in order to reduce the risk of collusion? Yeah, so we discussed both these scenarios. So the first is definitely confidential. Why confidential? Why not secret? Yeah, so this is a debatable question. So leave this question. But which of the following is best practice to employ in order to reduce the risk of collusion? Job rotation is the right answer. That is what we discussed. Now next is roles and responsibilities. So these are all self-read slides. The only thing important here is, as part of the Chief InfoSec Officer, right, ensuring that a risk assessment is performed is an important point here. So who will ensure that a risk assessment is performed? Is it responsibility of an information security manager? He may be custodian to it, but he may not be accountable to it. The risk management department is accountable for it. And under risk management department, you will have IT risk management department. Under IT risk management department, you will have Chief InfoSec Officer, and that's where he will take the ownership or the accountability to ensure that the risk assessment is performed. And that's where this concept comes into picture. Then the next is called as your data owner, data custodian, system owner. So owner is nothing but the person who owns. So let's say if I own a car, who will drive that car? I will decide, right? I mean, it will be Mr. A, Mr. B, a driver, anybody, right? So I will be deciding. An owner is the person who always decides as who will have access to this information. So in a company, when a new user is created, it is the owner who determines whether this person can have read, write, execute access to this information or not. Then the next concept is data custodian. A custodian is a person from the IT department, right? So custodian is a person who will work as per the direction or as per the approval given by the owner to actually provide those accesses to that new user. So mainly custodians are the IT people who don't have the approval power, but they configure the system, and that's where your custodian comes into picture. Then the next is called as system owner. Like you have data owner, you will have system owner, you will have SAP application system owner, you will have Oracle system owner. So these are the people who will approve whether a particular user can have access to a particular system or not. Then you have there are two concepts now. One is called as system administrator and other is called as security administrator. So mainly I have seen in my experience people confuse between both these terms. But please remember, a security administrator, as the name security is attached to this, he is the person who will decide from a security angle. So let's say which patch has to be installed. is a point which is thought by security administrator, and the installation of the patch on the system is defined by the system administrator, right? So there's a different in perspective here. So let's say a new user is created, right? So which all roles has to be assigned to the user will be decided by the security administrator. And let's say what should be the password criteria, or let's say what should be the length of the username, right? Or let's say whether the system can support a new user. All those administration kind of jobs, the system administration kind of jobs will be decided by the system administrator. The slides are very clear on this. After this session, if you read this again, I'm sure you will be able to get this concept. Else you are free to reach out to me on email. And then you have the user or the operator responsible for following security procedures. I think there's something missing here. That's fine. It's okay. So user or the operator is nothing but the person who is actually using the system, right? This is just a general thing, nothing more than that. Auditor is a person who examines security. So we have covered till 30 slides, right? So what I'll do is I'll park here, and the next session will start on the risk management, all those qualitative, quantitative, and then the assets valuation, and then we'll have asset types. Then you will have some mathematical questions on single loss expectancy, analyze loss expectancy, Delphi method. So next class would be the actual portion on this domain, and you will have various risk management methodologies like Octave, FRAP, and so on, and some generic concepts on security steering committee. Yeah, and so all this will take up in the next session, right? Anybody has any questions, please post on the chat window.